Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going on a deep dive into like a really pivotal time in European history. The rise of Germany after unified back in 1871. So picture this, okay? You're in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. It's 1871. The Franco-Prussian War has just wrapped up.
Yeah.
And a bunch of German princes are all gathered there, and they're about to like proclaim the birth of the German Empire.
Yeah, and, picking Versailles, the place where all the French kings had their seat of power, that wasn't just about, celebrating a win or whatever. It was a huge statement. Like, Germany was basically saying, we're the new top dog in Europe, and France, step aside.
It's like a total power shift, huh? And that's exactly what we're going to dig into today. How did Germany become so powerful so quickly?
Well, it's a story of, super fast change economically, politically, socially, and it all kicks off with this crazy industrial boom.
Okay, so I was reading about this and I was seriously blown away by how fast Germany became this huge industrial giant. They were even beating Britain in some industries. How did they pull that off?
It was like a perfect storm of things all coming together. First off, Germany was sitting on a gold mine of natural resources, stuff like coal and iron, the building blocks of industrialization. Second, their workforce was super skilled and disciplined thanks to a really solid education system. And then you had to factor in the population boom. Germany's population went from 41 million in 1871 to a crazy 67 million by 1914. That's tons of workers and a bigger market for all the stuff they were cranking out.
So it's like everything just fell into place at the right time.
Totally. But there's another big piece to this puzzle, the government. They went all in and set up a single currency for the whole country. Got the banking system streamlined and efficient, which helped businesses do their thing and grow. They also make sure the railroads were expanding so goods could get around easily. And they slapped on some tariffs to protect German industries from all that foreign competition.
Sounds like they had a pretty good game plan. One thing I thought was really interesting was how much Germany focused on science and technology early on. They were pouring money into research and development way before it became trendy.
Yeah, you're right. That was a smart move. German companies like Krupp Thyssen and Zeiss, some of them are still major players today. They became world leaders because they put so much into research and development. They understood that science and tech were the keys to innovation and making top-notch products.
So they weren't just building factories. They were investing in the people who could make them even better.
Exactly. That's what gave them such a big edge. But let's be real, this incredible economic transformation wouldn't have been possible without a seriously sharp mind calling the shots. And that brings us to Otto von Bismarck.
Ah, yeah, the Iron Chancellor. He was pretty much known for being super cunning and tough, right?
Yeah, that about sums it up. Bismarck's whole foreign policy was about making Germany stronger and keeping those rivals in check. He had three main goals. First, keep France isolated, don't let them make any alliances that could threaten Germany. Second, forge strong bonds with Austria and Russia. And third, avoid going head-to-head with Britain's navy, at least not right away. He was all about practicality, focusing on what would benefit Germany most in the moment.
I even found this quote from Bismarck. He compares nations to animals. He says something like, "Water rats don't pick fights with land rats," which I thought perfectly showed how well he understood strengths and weaknesses.
Oh yeah, that's totally Bismarck. Always thinking strategically. Now later on, he did change gears a bit and started challenging Britain's colonial empire overseas. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's dig a bit deeper into Bismarck himself, how he rose to power. Because he wasn't your average politician.
Yeah, that's what I got from reading about him. He seemed really ambitious and kind of rebellious even.
You're onto something there. He didn't just want to climb the political ladder slowly. He dove headfirst into the political arena as a delegate, passionately defending the government's policies. King Frederick William IV saw that and thought, this guy's got something special.
So he skipped the line and went straight to the top. Pretty bold.
You could say that. He earned the king's trust and then really honed his skills as a diplomat, which expanded his influence even more. And all of that led to him becoming chancellor of the newly unified German Empire in 1871, a job he held for almost 20 years. Now you can imagine, a leader as powerful and assertive as Bismarck wasn't exactly everyone's cup of tea.
Makes sense. Especially since he actually went toe-to-toe with the Catholic Church.
That's right. Bismarck saw the Catholic Church as a potential threat to German unity. He was worried that their loyalty to the Pope might undermine the German state.
It's interesting how that tension between religious institutions and states keeps popping up throughout history, even today. So how did this clash, which Bismarck called the battle for civilization, How did it all unfold?
Well, from 1871 to 1878, Bismarck launched what we now call the Kulturkampf. It was a series of policies designed to limit the church's power. He wanted to make sure Catholics were putting Germany first, not the church.
Okay, so what did he actually do? What kind of policies are we talking about?
He pushed through laws that gave the state control over Catholic education, even the appointment of priests. He disbanded some religious orders, kicked the Jesuits out of Prussia, and made civil marriage mandatory. Basically, he tried to cut down the church's influence in any way he could.
Wow, it's a pretty aggressive move. Seems like he was really serious about keeping the church in line.
He was, but like we often see with these kind of strong-arm tactics, there were some unintended consequences. His actions actually made Catholics rally around the church, which ended up boosting the political power of the Catholic Center Party in the German parliament.
So even the Iron Chancellor could make a mistake. Did he ever back down?
Well, being the pragmatist he was, Bismarck eventually realized he messed up and tried to patch things up with the church. He knew that alienating such a big chunk of the population wasn't going to end well.
Good point. Now, Bismarck wasn't just focused on the church. He also had issues with the growing socialist movement. What was that all about?
So by the late 1870s, German Marxists had formed the Social Democratic Party. They were pushing for things like parliamentary democracy and better working conditions.
I bet Bismarck, with his focus on control and order, wasn't too happy about those ideas. What did he do?
You got it. Bismarck saw these calls for democracy and worker rights as a direct threat to his power and the stability of the new German Empire. His first instinct was to clamp down. He tried to crush the movement by dissolving socialist groups, censoring their publications, and banning their meetings. But once again, this heavy-handed approach didn't really work out.
It's almost like he kept pushing people's buttons and unintentionally brought them together against him.
You're getting it. The repression actually had the opposite effect and unified the socialist movement even more. It's like a textbook example of how trying to silence people often just makes them louder.
So what did Bismarck do? He couldn't just let the socialist movement keep gaining steam. Did he have a plan B?
He did, and it was pretty surprising. Bismarck completely changed course and embraced social reforms as a way to appease the working class and kind of take the wind out of the socialist sails.
Really? That seems like a huge U-turn for someone who was so against socialist ideas. What made him change his mind?
Well, remember, Bismarck was always a pragmatist. He realized he had to address some of the workers' concerns if he wanted to keep things stable. So under his leadership, Germany became like a pioneer in social welfare. They introduced things like health insurance, accident insurance, even old age insurance for retirement.
Wow, that's pretty groundbreaking, especially for that time period. It's amazing how his attempts to shut down the socialist movement actually ended up creating some really positive changes for German workers.
It really shows how even the most authoritarian figures can be forced to adapt and compromise when enough pressure is applied. But it's important to note that even with these reforms, the Social Democratic Party kept growing stronger. By 1912, they actually held the most seats in the Reichstag. We'll see how this all plays out as we move into the next chapter of Germany's rise. But for now, let's just take a moment to absorb everything we've learned. We've covered a lot of ground.
Okay, so we've seen how Germany was really on a roll. Yeah. Booming economy, a shrewd leader in Bismarck, and they even had some groundbreaking social reforms, even if it wasn't exactly planned that way. But this is where things start to get really interesting, right? Cancer Kaiser Wilhelm II.
Yeah, for sure. This is where we see a major shift in leadership style. And unfortunately, it's also where we start to see the seeds of future conflict being planted. Bismarck and Wilhelm II were like total opposites. Bismarck was all about careful planning and strategy. He believed in realpolitik. That basically means a political philosophy focused on power and national interest, not so much on ethics or ideology. Wilhelm II, on the other hand, was much more impulsive, driven by this belief that he had a God-given right to rule and a real thirst for German dominance.
I read that Wilhelm II actually forced Bismarck to resign just 3 years after he became Kaiser. That's kind of crazy. It's like he was saying, out with the old, in with the new, I'm in charge now.
Exactly. It was a really bold move that definitely shook things up in Europe. Wilhelm II was making it crystal clear he wasn't going to be in anyone's shadow, not even the legendary Bismarck. He famously said there is only one master in the Reich, and that is I. Talk about a power move.
Wow, no mistaking that message.
Ooh.
So how was Wilhelm II's leadership different from Bismarck's? Besides the whole, I am the master thing.
Well, for one, Wilhelm II wasn't really into democratic reforms. Remember how Bismarck, even though he was authoritarian, introduced some progressive social policies?
Right, the health insurance, accident insurance, all that. Exactly.
Wilhelm II wasn't so worried about keeping the working class happy or giving people more say in government. He was a big believer in the traditional hierarchy of power, with himself at the top. He actually said that he ruled by divine right, just like his grandfather, and anyone who opposed him would be crushed. It was a completely different approach to leadership than Bismarck's more pragmatic style.
That sounds a bit ominous, to be honest. But he did continue Bismarck's social programs, right? It wasn't all about military might and absolute rule.
That's true. Wilhelm II wasn't totally oblivious to the needs of the people. He understood that social stability was important for staying in power, so he did keep investing in social welfare programs, things like public transportation and electricity. But his main focus was definitely on the military.
I was just about to say, it's pretty well known that Wilhelm II was obsessed with expanding Germany's military power. He poured money into the army and built up a massive navy, all with the goal of making Germany the dominant force in Europe.
You're absolutely right. Bismarck had been much more careful about expanding the military. But Wilhelm II was way more aggressive. He wanted a global empire that could rival Britain and France. He was convinced that Germany was destined for greatness, and that military strength was the key to achieving that. This aggressive military buildup, combined with his nationalistic speeches, really started to increase tensions in Europe.
So it sounds like in a lot of ways Wilhelm II's ambition and belief in German dominance were setting the stage for what would eventually become World War I.
That's a great observation. While Germany had experienced an incredible transformation in the decades after unification, becoming an economic and industrial powerhouse, Wilhelm II's policies ultimately planted the seeds of a conflict that would engulf Europe just a few decades later. It's a reminder that even the most powerful nations can be brought down by unchecked ambition and a failure to handle international relations wisely.
It's definitely a cautionary tale. It also makes me realize how important it is to study history, so we can learn from the mistakes of the past and hopefully make better choices in the present.
I couldn't agree more. Learning from the past is key to building a better future. Now, before we get into the long-term impacts of Germany's rise, which are pretty significant, I think we should pause here for a sec. We've covered a lot of ground, from Bismarck's cunning strategies to Wilhelm II's aggressive ambitions.
Yeah, good point. It's a lot to take in. All right, I think I've had a minute to process all that. We've talked about Germany's crazy economic and industrial growth, Bismarck being a total political mastermind, and Wilhelm II with all his ambition. But, like, what's the big takeaway here? Why should we
Well,
still care about Germany's rise to power over 100 years later?
that's the million-dollar question, right? What can we learn from all this? Well, for one, Germany's story is like a case study in the power of economic innovation and technological progress. Their investment in research and development totally paid off, turning them into a global industrial leader.
It's a good reminder that progress doesn't just happen on its own. It takes planning and investment. Or being open to new ideas. Kind of like when you're studying for a big exam. You can't just show up and wing it.
Exactly. There's a lot we can learn from this period of history and apply it to our own lives. Germany's story also shows how important strong leadership is. Bismarck was like a master chess player. He knew how to navigate the complexities of power, both at home and on the world stage. And then we have Wilhelm II, whose ambition and desire for dominance ultimately led to some pretty bad outcomes.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, right? You need strong leaders,
Yeah.
but they also got to be wise and responsible,
Yes.
especially when it comes to things like military power.
Absolutely. And finally, Germany's rise and everything that came after reminds us that history isn't just a bunch of boring old stories. It's full of lessons that can help us understand the world we live in today and maybe make better decisions for the future.
That's so true. It's like by studying the past, we can try to avoid making the same mistakes over and over again.
Exactly. Now, I want to leave you with a question to think about. Could any other country at that time have pulled off such a quick and dramatic transformation? Or was there something special about Germany that set them up for success? Think about it. Maybe do a little research on your own. You might be surprised by what you find.
That's a great question to wrap things up. It really gets you thinking about all the different factors that shape a nation's destiny. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Germany's rise to power. We hope you learned something new today, and maybe even got inspired to explore history a little bit more on your own. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.